Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
For there is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I am your host, AP Strange. This is my show, and tonight's show is brought to you by the Zutornian brand Doomsday Bunker. If you're looking for a good Doomsday Bunker to ride out your time until the Space Brothers can come to save us, look no further than the Zutornian brand, because the Zutornians have the materials that you need to build the perfect doomsday bunker. And on today's show, we're going over to Denmark for some high strangeness and Forteana legends and such, and talking to Simon Hesselager Johansen, who is a writer, a researcher, a rock music journalist, and a wonderful artist as well. I always enjoy seeing his drawings. And he writes for HidDenmark, which explores the history, folklore, and often ufology and high strangeness within Denmark, which I think is fascinating and something my listeners, a lot of us here in the United States of America, maybe never get to see. So it's a wonderful resource. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Many thanks, AP. And I think I should first talk a bit about HidDenmark's history and how it came to be. I got this idea for an interactive map with locations in Denmark that had various Fortean incidents like cryptid sightings, ghost stories, and UFO encounters and the like, where you could look up what happened and where to find those places and some analysis of the incidents. When I first talked to Thomas Brisson Jørgensen, whom I met in 2019 in the official Facebook group for Scandinavian UFO Information, who are the oldest UFO investigation group in Denmark. They have been around since 1957. And the idea for the website we got half from an idea for this smartphone app that Thomas he had started developing with another of his friends, Adam Asgaard, who's also part of the HidDenmark research team. But they then had to put that on standby because of various other details in their life. The other half of the idea was mine, and I got it. Don't laugh, but in the official Facebook group for the Center for Fortean Zoology, who are the oldest cryptozoological research organization in the United Kingdom, founded by Jonathan Downes, who wrote the first in-depth book about the Owlman of Cornwall, who's the British equivalent of Mothman. And in their Facebook group, not a CFZ member, but someone in them had made an interactive map with British Bigfoot sightings. And yeah, the thing about the UK is that they actually have a long history of folk tales about hairy wild men living in forests, going all the way back to the Middle Ages when they were called woodwoses, which means wood beings in the old English language. The best known of these woodwoses are the wild man of Orthon, the man monkey of Shropshire, and the big grey man of Ben Macdui in Scotland. The Danish royal coat of arms also has these heraldic wild men on each side of the Danish royal coat of arms, and they're kind of the same archetype. And the thing about in the 20th century, various zoologists, they then started trying to connect these wildman stories to like Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, and the Yeti, and things like that. So in 2020, our website got online. We also like had this voice map tour called the Mons Tour, which you can download into your smartphone and go on a guided tour around Copenhagen, being told about various artworks and reliefs and statues of like dragons and mermaids and other legendary creatures around the city of Copenhagen, and that also includes some displays of the royal coat of arms with those heraldic wild men, and that's a topic I find fascinating. And HidDenmark was at first known as much for the Mons Tour as for that interactive website, but I think right now I actually think that website with the interactive map is what we are known the most for. Uh, have you ever even heard of the Mons Tour before?
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, that used to be kind of like a major cash cow for us that we got like a lot of money through and got a lot of recommendations for. It also talked about things like at the town hall square in Copenhagen, near the town hall, there's this statue of a bull fighting a dragon, and the dragon is sculpted to look a lot like a sturgeon, which is one of these prehistoric looking very big fish that have also been proposed as the explanation for a lot of lake monster stories.
Right.
And the Copenhagen Stock Exchange that burned down a couple years ago. So this tour is now a bit out of date because we hadn't updated it. But the spire of the Copenhagen Stock Exchange used to like be shaped like three dragons resting whose tails then intertwined together and then formed the spire. I always thought that looked really cool, but unfortunately, that unfortunately that building no longer exists since it burned down in a fire a couple years ago.
Were they able to salvage the spire at least?
Not to my knowledge.
Oh no. Yeah, that's too bad.
Anyway, when Thomas showed me all his old books and magazines about UFOs from the 1950s up through the 60s and 70s to the 80s, I got the idea to make an article series for HidDenmark's website about Danish UFO contactees, since very a few of those they are known abroad at all. If any Danish UFO contactees, they're known outside of Denmark or were until I started writing about them. They're mostly known in Czechia and Slovakia because in the 90s there was a Czech UFO contactee named Ivo Benda who started translating the writings of various Western contactees into the Czech language, and this is something I'll get into later in the show. And the thing about Danish UFO encounters is that very few of them have been known outside Scandinavia until we started writing English language articles about them. I think the one that was like internationally well known was Evald Morup, this Danish police officer in the 1970s whose patrol car got stopped by a flying saucer 3 times. But now I see people in UFO-related Reddit forums and Facebook groups discuss Danish UFO cases using articles I wrote as sources, and sometimes even including some of the paintings I made as illustrations of them. The YouTube channel Stories Lost, they specialize in mainland European Fortiana that's obscure in English-speaking countries, and they've actually made several in-depth videos about various Danish UFO cases that I'm pretty sure I was the first person to write anything in English about. And I'm kind of curious, how many Danish UFO cases and other stories like that have you discovered through HidDenmark that you can name right now?
Well, I mean, I've enjoyed following along, and then just getting ready for this, I was particularly interested in the recent contactee cases that you
Yeah,
wrote.
those are those are the
But
ones I mostly I've mostly prepared. I've been mostly prepared to talk about. The one that's the Stories Lost most recently made a video about is the Sjællands Oil UFO case in 1967, where there were uh, these two boys who like saw this. Again, this UFO approach. One of them went home, went home before that, but the other he like saw this ship come close, and it has this kind of like balcony beneath with crew inside, and who like kind of like looked like humans, but like were like much shorter and had this kind of like air breathing apparatus on it. But it's the single best known of the Danish close encounters of the third kind inside Denmark itself.
okay, so that's one that still gets talked about.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
now it's
yeah.
now it also gets like talked about outside of Scandinavia. Uh, Something I should first make clear here is that HidDenmark is it's as much a fellowship of people with different but overlapping interests and opinions as it's an organization, and we are very stringent about not having any official standpoints about the various Fortean phenomena we cover. To start with, me and Thomas, we are the only ones who are that interested in cryptozoology and ufology, and the other main contributors, Adam and Lasse, they are more into older folkloric traditions and occult folk religion and stories about ghosts, elves, and fairies. And things like that. And again, the article about the Danish UFO contactees, those are mostly my project. I can have opinions about these occurrences as an individual person, but it's separate from what HidDenmark represents as an organization, because the only thing we really have in common is that we are interested in this overall topic, but we have like very different opinions on them, and it's not the same theories we necessarily subscribe to.
Well, right, yeah. It seems you got a team going on, but everybody has their own individual work that they contribute, which is great actually, because it gives you a wider array of stories to pull from folklore or legend and fairy tales and all that kind of stuff to more modern, very modern in some cases, accounts of humanoids or things seen in the sky. I imagine that comes in particularly handy when you have very old accounts that could be UFOs, but not necessarily. Because we were talking beforehand about about pronunciation, but it was very interesting to me that there was a what's thought maybe to have been a UFO sighting in the year 1600 in Denmark. See if I
The
remember how to do it.
Aarslev Enge incident.
Oslo Inga. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and your pronunciation is surprisingly good. This was when some farmers in Denmark, they saw what they described as a wagon without horses that suddenly appeared, and outside walked these strangely dressed people who were taller than any human, and that's often cited as the first Danish UFO case whatsoever, and the first Danish close encounter of the third kind. But it took place at a time when air travel hadn't even been invented, let alone space travel. So, what kind of frame of reference did people have for discussing something like that back then?
Right. Yeah, and it's funny to read about the encounter because they even try to rationalize it with a materialist explanation in the moment where they're saying, well, maybe the cows are stirring up dust and that's what makes it look like this thing is coming off the ground, but it's the kind of thing that maybe wouldn't have been discovered without somebody digging into folklore or history to really find the story in order for people with the UFO interest to make the connection.
And the thing is that because of UFOs now being like a popular topic in pop culture right now, there was actually a major Danish newspaper called Information, which interviewed Thomas about the case for a front page story, and that's something we are also like really really proud of.
Yeah, yeah, it's always good to get the press. You could be the material expert for the the really old UFO encounter.
Yeah, and uh, the main focus of this show is going to be about UFO contactees in Denmark, which I've started writing an article series about, and I'm going to talk about those two that I have articles about, but there are going to come some more articles later in this year. The reason why there haven't been that many high-profile UFO contactees here in Denmark is in part because the country is very small with a population of just 6 million, and that means there's not that big an audience for culture outside the mainstream to begin with. But it's also because the UFO culture here in Denmark has always been like more serious and scientifically minded for the most part. The thing about Zutorn, the oldest Danish UFO research organization, is that it was originally formed by followers of George Adamski, who was the first high-profile contactee of the modern era. But most of the founders of Zutorn, especially the first leader H.C. Petersen, they were military officers who mostly started paying attention to Adamski because he was the first person to talk about UFOs and really attempt make it normal to take the topic seriously and talk about it in mass media. And the thing about H.C. Petersen, he actually got interested in the topic while he was stationed abroad on an American Air Force base. And he then found out that the United States Air Force, they were still investigating UFO sightings, even if they officially had closed the Project Blue Book, which were their official UFO investigation. And he then concluded there was like something more to it than the authorities were letting on.
Yeah,
Sufoy, they even had George Adamski as a keynote speaker at their annual conference is in 1963. But the thing about already by the mid 1960s, Sufoy had this internal split between the people who followed Adamski and those who were like more critical of his claims about human-looking aliens living on Venus and elsewhere in our solar system. When the space probes that both the United States and the USSR they had sent to Venus, they found out more and more that Venus was completely inhospitable to human life. This
right.
resulted in H.C. Petersen leaving Sufoy in 1965 to instead form the Danish branch of Adamski's International Get Acquainted Program, or IGAP. IGAP, they started publishing their own magazine called UFO Contact, whereas Sufoy's magazine was called UFO News, or UFO Nyt in Danish. And Sufoy, they today have a reputation for being like very hardline skeptical in orientation, but they did not become as skeptical as they are now until the 1990s, and they were still regularly entertain the extraterrestrial hypothesis well into the 1980s. And considering, again, this is my own personal opinion, not HidDenmark's as a collective,
Mhm.
as a collective entity. I think considering all the revelations with I think it was Bill Moore at that UFO conference where where he made it clear that a lot of a lot of the narratives and the conspiracy theories uh, that had been popularized in the UFO circles in the 1980s turned out to be this disinformation campaign ran by Richard Doty for the U.S. Air Force in order to keep secret and distract people from like the secret test flights of experimental aircraft. All the stuff that Greg Bishop he wrote about in Project
Hmm.
Beta and Mark Pilkington wrote about in Mirage Men, then it's understandable to that someone in UFO circles would become so skeptical would become so skeptical.
Yeah, yeah. So would you say that SUFO is kind of like the Danish equivalent of NICAP here in the United States? It's sort of like
Uh,
that.
yeah, they're like the serious and scientific aspect of of ufology that they represent. There was also a third Danish UFO organization who were active from the late 1960s up to the 80s called Free UFO Study or FUFOS. Their magazine was called UFO Aspect, and they were way more open to high weirdness and exotic theories than SUFOI, but they were less loyal to any particular contactee and their stories and histories than IGAP were. And IGAP, they are really critical of all UFO contactees other than George Adamski, despite having very similar messages,
Yeah,
and they regularly declared people like Billy Meyer and George Van Tassel obvious frauds. And
right.
both,
Well, Adamski did too. I mean, Adamski made pretty strong statements at different points about the other contactees being liars. I think
okay,
he,
that doesn't surprise me. And the thing about
yeah,
IGAP, they also took great care to distance themselves from like the hippie movement and the parapsychology and cryptozoology and things like that. But FUFOS, they did not, and they would like frequently in a UFO aspect, they would run as many articles about parapsychology, telepathy, psychedelic drugs, and things like that as they did on UFOs. And the thing about in 1970s, the FUFOS, they actually became bigger than either IGAP or and SUFOI, and the UFO aspect, their magazine had more subscribers than either UFO Contact or UFO had. That, however, didn't last, and in the mid 80s or so, UFO Aspect they turned into an all-purpose new age magazine called Knud Aspect or New Aspect. And
mm,
again, it basically seems to me like people they were much more open-minded about a lot of things back in the 1970s compared to all pretty much all decades afterwards.
yeah, yeah. I would have to say so. Um, it is fascinating to me the reach that George Adamski had as well with the Get Acquainted program because he had followers all over the world. He could just travel the world and speak anywhere. Um, even like Japan, as far as Japan, people loved him in Japan. You know,
Yeah,
uh,
I noticed that a while ago I watched the Godzilla film Invasion of Astro Monster, also called Godzilla versus Monster Zero, and
that's my
that one is
favorite one.
very clearly
Yeah,
satirizing George Adamski style UFO contactee movements and the aliens who pretend to be friendly but really aren't. They say similar things at first, like as George Adamski's Venusian Space Brothers did, and their spaceships. They're very clearly modeled on this spaceship photo that Adamski took. That skeptics uh, say is a chicken brooder. I think it was was it Jim was it Jim Mosley who demonstrated it to be this chicken coop brooder thing.
yeah, yeah. Something that you could like feed the chickens with. Yeah, like a hopper for chicken feed.
Yeah, and another thing is the fact that George Adamski he could become like the face of ufology. That feels like something that couldn't have happened in that couldn't happen today. Also, Eric von Däniken he just died, and in many ways he simply came across as like the product of like a completely different and in many ways a more naive era, and even his message felt even Eric van Daniken's take on things struck me as like, again, the product of a different era than the more cynical and paranoid tone ufology started taking from the 1980s onwards.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of problematic stuff that gets wrapped up in both. With, but I thought it was really interesting that the contactees that you write about, the Adamski comes into the story a little later, because you have a contactee that claimed contact before Adamski met Orthon, and that's Josef Maliszewki.
Another member of the Polish diaspora, oddly enough, Josef Maliszewki, sort of Adamski before Adamski. I first heard of him through Willy Wegner from FUFOS, who wrote a book about Danish UFO landings published by FUFOS in 1978. Wegner, he would later become much more skeptical than he was back then. He later wrote a couple books about Danish UFO history in the 1990s, which also goes in more depth about Maliszewski. His surname is Maliszewski with an L, not Matiszewski with a T, which some sources misspell it. A Polish immigrant living in Denmark, where he worked as a mechanic at a gas station in southern Jutland. And his first encounter, he had 3 encounters, but a lot of the sources only write about the first one. The first one starts on June 19 of 1951 at about 2 a.m. Josef Maliszewski, he heard a mysterious whistling sound from outside his summer residence in Münsterkolonien 166 in Sønderborg. He went outside and saw a strange-looking vehicle landing in a nearby field to the east in the direction of the village of Sundsmark. The vehicle somewhat resembled an aircraft, but it was 100 meters long, and that's longer than the biggest commercial aircraft manufactured even today, and it was bluish silver in color. This vehicle had half-moon-shaped wings that folded out when landing, a rotor in the middle, and stood on landing gear with horseshoe-like feet. The vehicle also had round windows on the side like a seagoing ship's portholes. Maliszewski, he then ran towards the vehicle, but approximately 50 meters from it, he was suddenly stopped by this mysterious force. He found that he could not walk any further, but he could still hear and see and move his arms and hands. Then he noticed something else, that the birds had stopped singing, and the cattle and the horses in the field had also stopped moving. And I think this is a sign that something physical did happen, even if no matter how Maliszewski might have experienced it. He assumed for some reason that the crew of this vehicle had come to abduct the livestock in the field, but then he suddenly heard this telepathic voice saying, "Do not be afraid, we will not take any of them." Maliszewski, he then saw 8 small flying saucers exiting the vehicle, 4 from each side of these small doors on each side of the vehicle. These saucers then ascended into the sky and stayed hovering over the bigger vehicle while making this slight wobbling sound. Then an escalator of sorts descended from the vehicle, and 6 crew members, they walked out through the escalator. 2 of the crew, they started repairing the right wing of the vehicle, 2 others started inspecting the left wing, and the remaining 2 then stood guard at the escalator. The crew, they looked perfectly similar to Earth humans, just being unusually tall and had dark skin and were extremely graceful in appearance. And Maliszewski, he would later describe the crew as looking Southeast Asian, specifically reminding him of people from Java in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
And the crew, they wore dark glittery, dark blue one-piece spacesuits with no apparent seams and transparent bubble-shaped helmets. Their faces were covered by a type of oxygen mask with tubes connecting to 2 oxygen tanks on their backs, similar to those worn by Navy divers. Maliszewski, he saw more crew members inside the vehicle's windows, and they wore similar uniforms as those that stood outside. While Maliszewski, he beheld this strange vehicle and its crew, he then said something to himself like, "Oh, how we people on Earth are stupid," only to immediately receive a telepathic reply from the vehicle about us Earth people not being any less intelligent than the spacefarers. But now that we had entered the atomic age, these space people, they had arrived to warn us about the importance of taking control of our own destiny. The telepathic message from the space people mentioned that they also had mastered nuclear energy, but we here on Earth had not yet learned to use it in a safe, cheap, and peaceful manner, like the space people had. And I think this doesn't just like refer to us using nuclear power for weapons, but also the difference between nuclear fusion and nuclear fission, because nuclear fusion, which is scientists here on Earth have been working on but haven't made as cheap and viable as fission, is much safer and doesn't produce any waste like nuclear fission does. And I don't know if this was a concept that was popularly understood at the time, but I think it's worth remarking on.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's a familiar theme too. The Space Brothers are always very concerned about nukes and nuclear energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after the crew they had finished repairing the spaceship's wings, the wings retracted back into the ship's hull and folded back out again. The crew they went back into the ship, and the escalator retracted. Maliszewki then received a final telepathic message from the crew saying, "Farewell, we will meet again." The ship ascended into the sky and made a whistling sound. This is something I've noticed UFOs are often described as making a whistling sound when ascending. Yeah. Then, when it reached an altitude of 100 meters, the small unmanned saucers retracted into the bigger spaceship, four on each side, and it kept ascending further and disappeared in a flash of light that illuminated the entire sky with sparks of light visible afterwards. Maliszewski found that he could suddenly move again, and the cattle and horses in the field also started running away as if frightened. The birds also resumed singing, and they had like stopped singing when the ship landed. Maliszewski then noticed that the spaceship had left landing traces on the field with two clear marks from the horseshoe-like feet on the landing legs. Each landing mark surface was 4 by 2 meters, and 35 footsteps were visible between the traces. He the next day asked the neighbors about whether they had seen anything unusual, and he found out that many of the neighbors, they had actually walked over to the field afterwards and got a good look at the mysterious traces. So again, I think something unusual did happen in a physical sense.
Yeah. I'd like to unpack that first encounter just a little bit before we move on with the other stuff, because there's a couple of really interesting things in there. Just for context here, we mentioned that it was earlier than Adamski's meeting with Orthon. And just for listener context, in case people aren't as obsessed as you or I with the dates and times, this is a full year and some months ahead of Adamski's encounter with Orthon. So that it's very notable for that alone, you know. I think it's worth noting that. But also just the size of the craft is and the shape, the size and shape of the craft are very interesting. Like you said, 300 meters.
100 meters.
100 meters, right? Okay, but still, 100 meters is long.
Yeah, and the design of the ship, Maliszewski, he made a sketch of the ship, which he also which he also sent a copy of to the local newspaper afterwards, and also to UFO and UFO News, and it also got printed in Willy Wegner's books, both about UFO landings in Denmark that he wrote in '78, and the books about Danish UFO histories in the 1990s that he written back then. and the design of the ship reminds me quite a bit of the Senker Silbervogel, which means silverbird in German, which was this concept for a rocket-powered space plane that a German engineer named Eugen Senker he drew for the German Air Force during World War II for use as a strategic bomber.
Okay.
And
Do you think Maliszewski would have been familiar with that design?
I actually don't know.
You're right. Yeah.
I don't know, but again, it's interesting compare that if you compare to already back then, there were people like who had pointed out that the only man-made vehicles that were capable of the speed and maneuvers reported from UFOs were some of the Germans' experimental aircraft during World War II, like the Orthon HO 200 and 29 prototype jet fighter, which is like an early stealth, like an early stealth plane, and there were also again the Foo Fighters and Donald Keogh's book Flying Saucers Are Real also mentioned this about that some of the flying saucers they could perhaps be like a secret experimental aircraft developed from the German technology during World War II. There was also a UFO C3K report in 1944 at Kongens Tisted where there was this boy who saw this saucer-shaped vehicle and its crew wearing high-pressure flight suits. But again, he back then he thought they were like German Air Force pilots testing an experimental vehicle.
Yeah, I mean the space suit sort of look is very different from what you see with later contactees as well. Having like the full bubble helmet and the breathing apparatus. It's actually something you'd more expect to see both from somebody from another planet or somebody in the Air Force at the time. So,
That's also interesting. And the thing about early science fiction artists, they would depict spacesuits as like scuba gear with this air tank connecting with these lines to the helmet. But real spacesuits don't have that.
right, right.
So that's like about drawing spacesuits like scuba gear. That's like an old science fiction cliche that I find pretty amusing when it again turns up like this. There's also that he described the spaceship crew as looking human, but specifically looking Southeast Asian. And according to John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, or Visitors from Space, as it was called in the UK printing I own, Men in Black, they are disproportionately described as looking Asian or just ethnically ambiguous. Uh,
Right.
and in the US, that is proportionally described as Japanese or Korean when the witnesses specify specific nationality.
Yeah, and it's in stark contrast again to Adamski with what gets referred to as the Nordic type alien with the blonde hair and if fair complexion and all this other stuff.
If you look
So
at some young photos of the German electronic musician Klaus Schulze, he like totally looks like one of Adamski's Nordic Venetians back then, and I kind of suspected that he almost deliberately modeled his public image on Orthon back then.
yeah, maybe.
The
But
first Schulze's first album, Ehrlich, displays like a gray alien on the cover, so it's from I think it's from '72 or so. So Schulze clearly had some familiarity with the UFO culture.
yeah, well, there you go. Maybe you'd have to ask him, I
He's dead
guess.
now, Schulze.
Oh, he's dead. Yeah, yeah.
He died last
So,
year, I think.
oh, that's bad. Well, in regard to the description, in your blog post, you have some artworks, recreations of these landings and the humanoids that came out. Where does that art come from? Because those are really
That was some AI prompts that Thomas he got made, but it's where he deliberately asked them to like replicate the style of 1950s science fiction illustrations. It's they're unfortunately not some of my illustrations, but considering their AI artwork, they're really really well done.
Yeah, it's better than I would expect from AI art, but it evokes a picture anyway. The descriptions, the way you write it, and the way it was reported by Maliszewski is evocative. Like they're really cool, like blue uniforms. I thought it was kind of funny. We're getting ahead of the narrative a bit, but when he encounters the um, the women of the space fleet, they're wearing like the mini skirts, which is kind of like Star Trek at the time.
Oh
or
yeah, and
well, actually, it
this
came in
was like
later, but
a decade
yeah,
before the original Star Trek.
right. This is
Star
before
Trek
Star Trek. Yeah,
that encounter took place in uh, in
53.
54.
Yeah, okay, 54.
And something else, a sign that I think something weird physical did happen to Maliszewski on the first encounter was that his pocket watch, when he took it up, he found out it had stopped at 2:30. When he arrived back at his summer residence, he saw that the clock in his bedroom had also stopped at 2:30. A few days later, he attempted to repair both the pocket watch and the stationary clock. Uh, and he got the pocket watch to work, but not the stationary clock, which he later sent to a laboratory for analysis. Unfortunately, I can't find any information on what the laboratory's result was after examining the stationary clock. He also had a weird acidic taste in his mouth, Maliszewski, and was constantly thirsty, had problems with falling asleep as well as diarrhea. So I think something weird did happen to him physically.
Yeah, and these
Um,
are kind of familiar symptoms of like post encounter. Um, yeah, but that would come later. Like in the UFO literature, you often hear about stopped clocks, mechanical malfunctions, and health effects. But this,
and
his
yeah, but this
encounter
wasn't
predates a lot of
this
it.
wasn't common in UFO cases at this time.
Right, right. That's what I'm saying. Is this predates all of that? So it's not like he just picked it up from other encounters and was making up his own story to match other stuff that had been reported. Right,
No,
right.
this is one reason I find his case so fascinating. Maliszewski he also later told his co-workers at the gas station about the incident. None of them believed him, and they replied that he had probably been hallucinating or dreaming or gotten drunk or mistaken an ordinary aircraft for a spaceship. But he replied that he had never been intoxicated in his life. And after work, he wrote to the local newspaper Sønderjyden, the South Jutlandian, about his experience. And he also made this sketch of the spaceship, the one that I think looked like the Sinker Silbervogel.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and it's a good sketch too. I mean, you could tell it's like a somebody with a mechanical background sketching it because it
that's
looks
a good
like a
again. That's a good observation. That's something I hadn't noticed myself, but that makes a lot of sense. Actually, where you like can see all the components and the engine nozzles and so on, and where everything else is located. And again, here's the second out of the three encounters in total that Maliszewski had, and a lot of sources, including Wegner's first book from 1978, only describe the first encounter. Wegner's later books about Danish UFO cases that he wrote in the 90s mention them all three. The second encounter starts on May 18 of 1954, which starts when Maliszewski he went on a fishing trip at 2 a.m. to his favorite spot halfway between Hørup Hav and Sønderskov, that is Hørup Sea and the southern forest.
okay.
Maliszewski he would there see a small, elegant-looking saucer-shaped vehicle flying towards him over the water at a low altitude. The spaceship made a buzzing sound that Maliszewski he later compared to that of a sewing machine. The flying saucer stopped close to him, and a hatch popped open, and the pilot disembarked from the ship. The pilot held a silver-colored pitcher containing a blue liquid and poured it into a glass for Maliszewski, who at first hesitated to drink it. Maliszewski then found his anxiety disappearing and drank the glass of blue liquid, which tasted similar to red wine. And here is something that both me and Thomas found curious, that earlier after his first encounter, Maliszewski claimed never to have been intoxicated, but on the second encounter, he could recognize the taste of red wine.
No, that's a good point. Although I suppose, I don't know if he was Catholic, but he may have had wine at communion.
Yeah.
At church, maybe that's the point of reference. But
again, that's a good point. The pilot, he then invited Maliszewski aboard the ship. When the spaceship had flown out over the ocean, the pilot then played a pre-recorded message on a tape that was spoken in fluent Danish by a feminine voice. The saucer pilot also gave Maliszewski a piece of bread he had, and the voice from the tape recorder told Maliszewski to eat the bread aboard the ship. Again, there's this similarity to the Holy Communion again, which is a very interesting parallel, and also notable that Whitley Strieber he later called like his first book about his alien encounters literally Communion.
Right.
So there's another synchronicity there.
Yeah, it all connects together. So
and the Saucer's pilot played more tape recordings where this woman's voice, speaking in fluent Danish, described in fine detail how the spaceship engines functioned and showed Maliszewski the machinery on board. Again, the stuff about the nuclear reactors functioning according to different operating principles than the ones we had on Earth, being both safer, making less waste, and being cheaper to maintain. Again, that really sounds like nuclear fusion when listening to it today. And the flying saucer was powered by a nuclear reactor located beneath its floor, and with an anti-gravity engine that used electromagnetic field to compress air and create an air cushion, and could also be used to make their spaceships turn invisible. Maliszewski asked the pilot where he came from, and the pilot played another tape recording that had been made apparently before the trip. This message told Maliszewski that these spacefarers came from a planet called Zutorn in another solar system, not to be confused with Saturn in our own solar system. Different articles about Maliszewski's encounters, they use different spellings. Some of them spell it S-U-T-O-N. Others, they spell it Z-U-T-O-R-N. And Maliszewski himself, he never made it clear which spelling he preferred. And Zutorn had 4 moons and orbited a sun similar to our own.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the feminine humanoids, are they in charge of the ship? Is this like the captain of the ship?
He later met this on his third trip. He met this woman aboard the Zutornian mothership, who seemed to be in charge, and the Zutornian
we haven't gotten that far yet.
Matriarchal character is another thing about Maliszewski's stories that I haven't seen many others comment on. The pilot also disclosed to Maliszewski that the Zutornians, they had this mothership in orbit around the Earth where it would stay for a 15-year mission. Again, that almost sounds like something from the 60s Star Trek series. And the saucer could not fly further away from the mothership than 50,000 kilometers. In the upper reaches of our atmosphere, the Zutornian vehicles, they flew on magnetic waves and not air cushions like they use closer to the surface. And before the Zutornian pilot dropped Maliszewski off at this fishing spot, he told Maliszewski that they would return to picking up again exactly 14 days later. And that's exactly what happened on May 30 of 1954. Maliszewski, he would meet the same saucer pilot as a couple weeks before, again at his favorite fishing spot. Once more, Maliszewski was invited aboard the small saucer-shaped ship by the pilot, who smiled but did not utter a word and instead communicated by telepathy like in the first encounter. The pilot offered Maliszewski to show him how beautiful outer space was. This time, the pilot took Maliszewski up through the atmosphere to the kilometer-long Zutornian mothership orbiting the Earth. From the saucer, Maliszewski could both see the Earth and observe the aurora borealis near the poles, which Maliszewski described as a fire slinging up from the surface and shining as bright as the sun itself. Maliszewski saw this from a television screen aboard the saucer, not through any windows in it. He was also shown video recordings that the Zutornians had taken of other planets in our solar system, including Saturn and its moons. The saucer eventually arrived at the mothership and entered through a circular airlock on its side, where the pilot and Maliszewski waited a minute before they could leave the saucer and take a walk aboard the mothership. Aboard the mothership, Maliszewski met an extremely beautiful and extremely tall and slender woman, described as approximately 2 meters tall, and she wore a glittering suit, a miniskirt, and a cloak. She was accompanied by similar-looking individuals who said nothing. The Zutornian woman spoke fluent Danish and gave Maliszewski 3 kisses, one on each cheek and one on the forehead. She then told him, "You are my brother, and I am your sister. You should not believe that you are alone in this mighty universe." And again, I think the implication is that the pre-recorded messages that the saucer pilot played to Maliszewski aboard the flying saucer was by this woman Maliszewski that she had made. Maliszewski, he then asked her about how Zutornian society was organized, about whether they had any type of religion. She then told Maliszewski that they knew of an entity they called the Supreme Being, and that the only thing that the Supreme Being requested was that you love your neighbor. The Earth was the Supreme Being's colony, which he had used similar races to colonize, who might have had different skin colors, but were the same underneath. She then said that the Supreme Being wished no evil upon his creations, but there existed also a being of envy who wanted to destroy everything, and this being of envy might be the same entity as the devil that humans believed in.
Right.
Maliszewski then had a lengthy discussion with the Zutornian woman about the state of affairs on planet Earth. She told him that the people of Earth, they ought to abolish military and money-based economies and work less and give independence to all colonies to make our society closer in line to the Zutornians. The Zutornians had no use for passports and wandered freely between planets and viewed life on Earth as similar to prison, because we kept restricting our lives for arbitrary reasons. She also told Maliszewski that space people similar to those on Zutorn, they lived on many planets throughout the cosmos, all of which ruled by the Supreme Being, and these people did not age like we humans did on Earth. Their planet had their plant and animal life like that here on Earth. The reason that the Zutornians had not yet officially contacted us here on Earth was that we were not intelligent enough yet to only use our nuclear powers for peaceful purposes. And if a third world war would happen, then human life on Earth would not survive. The Zutornians, they had come to Earth to warn us against exactly that happening. And the Zutornian woman told Maliszewski that on her planet, the small was as the great, and the great as the small, which meant that nobody had a position above anyone else. She also told him that Venus was inhabited by space humans. And again, this woman then took Maliszewski on a tour around the mothership, which was 1 kilometer long and had a crew of 300 men and women, as well as 100 dwarves.
Yeah.
Again, that's something I find notable, that mention of the dwarves.
Yeah, because it's almost like you have 2 different alien peoples that are coexisting on the ship, you know?
Yeah. And Maliszewski saw gardens with flowers around the mothership and was told that the inner machinery of the ship was made from steel and silver, but the exterior hull was made from a plastic-like material that was derived from the coffee plant. That's another really random detail that just feels so eccentric that it doesn't feel like it would be 100% made up.
Right. Well, I'd believe that the power to travel through the universe and the materials it takes to get there is coffee. You know, just as a fan of coffee. So
Yeah, and Maliszewski had no problem communicating with the crew, as the Zutornians they had been following radio transmissions from Earth for long enough that they could fluently understand every language spoken on the Earth. And he found out that the Zutornians took, in particular, interest in listening to church services.
yeah. So I mean that might explain the communion based offering earlier too.
Yeah, that's a good point, and they also already knew about the God and devil of Christianity, and that their own supreme being and being of envy seem to be the same things.
I feel like this comes up every time you have contactees too. They always want to ask about God and the devil and like, do you have Jesus in outer space? Like, I feel like a lot of contactees do
Yeah,
this very same conversation. You know?
yeah, but there are other contactees like George Adamski and Billy Meyer, whose the philosophies they get from the aliens, specifically from Venusians and Pleiadians, respectively, were like more similar to Helena Blavatsky style theosophy.
Yep.
And when I started reading more books by and essays by George Adamski, I just realized that the philosophy that Adamski allegedly got from Venusians struck me as very similar to that of Jiddu Krishnamurti, a philosopher of religion from India who used to be a member of the Theosophical Society, but later left it. And I'm pretty sure Adamski, he was also a former theosophist.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, he had his own kind of group called the Royal Order of Tibet at one point. Um, Adamski did. It was and it has been explained by some perhaps as an excuse to be able to drink wine during prohibition, but when alcohol was illegalized for a while. um uh so I mean, yeah, Adamski certainly had esoteric leanings that dipped into theosophy, if not were entirely, made from that. So uh that's interesting to consider. um but we can't really paint all the contactees with one wide brush. But I feel like the question of God and of Jesus comes up from a lot of various contactees. They always want to ask, like, people from outer space if Jesus, have you met Jesus too?
And it's the same and it's the same
Yeah,
issue with Rael, that a French UFO prophet. He was outright told that
right,
Jesus was an extraterrestrial human hybrid like himself.
right, yeah, yeah, the realism, yeah.
Yeah. And when Maliszewski he had been given a guided tour of the Zutornian mothership, they took him back to the exact same fishing spot where they had picked him up, and dropped him off at half an hour past 5 a.m. And this time they didn't stop his pocket watch, and now he could see that the trip aboard the Zutornian mothership had lasted 3.5 hours.
Okay.
So apparently they had fixed their started using propulsion systems that didn't disrupt mechanical clocks like on their first visit.
Right, right. Well,
And
that's a nice thing to do, so he doesn't have to waste his time fixing his watch again.
yeah. Yeah, maybe they had read about the incident in that local newspaper that he reported his first experience to. Again, they looked human enough that they could like pass for Earth humans, the Sutornians.
Right. Or they could have been, if it was ever reported on the radio, they probably we're listening to the radio. They said that they like to listen to the radio, so
Yeah.
yeah.
But the thing is that Sufoy, they would not form until 1957. So there was really no organized Danish UFO investigation group he could go to, Maliszewski. So in 1958, in December, UFO News, or UFO Nyt as it's called in Denmark, Sufoy's magazine, they printed an article about Maliszewski's sightings, including an illustration of the spaceship that I talked about. And in 1959, Maliszewski, he became one of the main speakers at Sufoy's annual conference. Then in 1963, in March, he revealed in an interview with a local newspaper that he was working on a spaceship model, and on his 80th birthday, he would gather representatives of the Danish press on a space trip to the moon. And that photograph of Maliszewski holding the model of the saucer that the Zutornian pilot invited him into on his second and third encounters. That's the one that photo is the one that I've picked as the thumbnail image for this very episode, because you see Maliszewski holding this model of a flying saucer, and in the background there's a photograph of the Danish royal family's yacht with the Danish flag, and I think this photo like perfectly encapsulates the entire topic of the episode.
Yeah, no, and it's a great photo too. And particularly striking to me is the saucer design itself. It's not the Adamski saucer. I was trying to remember which one specifically it reminded me of. Maybe the McMinnville flying saucer photo.
No, the
Um,
McMinnville, that's again more that's more angular and has this and lower and wider and looks more sleek and a bit and a bit imposing. There's,
hmm,
however, like a German progressive rock band called Guru, whose first album was called UFO, and they used as the cover art the McMinnville photo.
okay. I'm thinking of a very specific photo. When I saw the model design that he's holding up in the photo that you sent along, the one that's being used as the thumbnail for this one, as you said, uh, it reminds me of something I've seen before. It's got this weird kind of very flat appearance at the bottom, uh, and projecting more from the top, I guess. I'm not sure where
Yeah,
I've seen it, but it's very different from you know the Adamski design
Adamski.
with like the ping pong balls on the bottom and everything.
Yeah, but anyway, in on the October of 26th of 1963, Maliszewski died before he could invite the Danish press on a spaceship voyage to the moon. But his
Yeah.
son, who lived in the town of Varde at the time, inherited this spaceship model.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And Maliszewski, he is virtually unknown today, and very little about his experiences has been written outside of Denmark. And as I mentioned, a lot of Danish articles about Maliszewski only mention his first encounter, not the following two ones, perhaps because the elements of high strangeness that perhaps wouldn't seem believable to a country whose culture makes a point of like being very rational and pragmatic about everything.
Right. Yeah, and I think in general throughout the history of studying UFOs and experiencers, there's been an attitude where somebody having an encounter, like one single encounter, makes sense, but if they have a series of them, then that strains credulity, you know. So
And
sometimes people intentionally hide the later stories or don't bother with them because they just want that initial one, you know.
yeah, and it's also like this is also like the first of the Danish C3K cases where the witness actually describes the vehicle as an extraterrestrial spaceship and its crew as extraterrestrials. And we had the Aarslev Enge case from 1600. That was before air travel, let alone space travel. was possible, and the witnesses they interpreted was they saw as a wagon with no horses and its passengers as unusually tall, strangely dressed people. And there was the Kongens Tisted case in 1944, where the witness he interpreted the vehicle as an experimental German military aircraft, and its crew as Luftwaffe pilots.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's one of Maliszewski's 51 encounter. It was not just the first contactee case in Denmark, but one of the first classic contactee cases anywhere on the planet, because Adamski's contact with Orthon from Venus would not happen until the following year on November 20 of 1952. And again, of course, this scenario of human-looking aliens traveling to Earth to warn humans to not nuke ourselves or nuke the rest of the solar system. That's the exact same plot premise of the popular science fiction film The Day the Earth Stood Still, which might have premiered in the United States in 1951, but it did not premiere here in Denmark until November 6th of 1952, and that was more than a year after Maliszewski's first encounter.
Right. Right. I mean, the story that movie was based on had been published prior, though. I forget what the title of the short story was that it was based on, or maybe
Farewell
it's a novella.
To the Master.
That's it. Yep, that's the one. So, but I don't know that would have been. I don't know how far the publishing went for that. If it was just published in American sci-fi magazines or not. So.
I don't know again if it and again I don't know, maybe it could have been translated into Danish or even Polish, or maybe he could gotten an maybe some of the magazines also got exported to the UK, where they could be found here in mainland Europe. Again, I don't know.
Right.
And something else that I noticed was that Maliszewski's second and third encounters, they are a bit more similar to other contactees, like the whole setup with the aliens having like these long cigar-shaped motherships that are like aircraft carriers for like the manned flying saucers that are kind of like scout ships. That's also how Adamski described the Venusian fleet, and uh, the encounter with this beautiful woman who was the captain of the Zutornian ship on May 30 of 1954. That's a year after Truman Bethurum. He wrote about having encountered the woman space captain Aura Raines from the planet Clarion in 1953.
Yeah. Yep. Who he described as being tops in shapeliness and beauty. That's the Truman Bethurum story is pretty wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely that kind of Aura Raines feel to the feminine characters that Maliszewski encounters, and that's kind of why I asked if they're kind of in charge, right? Because
Yeah.
it's a matriarchal society where Aura Raines was in charge in the Bethurum encounter, where she's the captain.
Yeah, and it also, and again, that's something that I don't think anyone else they like commented on before you brought it up. That from Maliszewski's accounts, it is very clear that the Zutornians have a matriarchal society structure, but I didn't pick up on that until you mentioned it either.
Oh, all right. Well,
Also, the stuff about on the first encounter, it's also what contains a perfect example of what Jenny Randall's British ufologist calls the Oz factor, where time stands still and all sounds disappear. But Maliszewski does not mention anything in the second or third encounter.
Right, that doesn't happen. Well, you wonder if that's like a defensive shield that gets put up. That's kind of the way it almost reads in that first encounter, is that he's stopped in his tracks and can't move, and everything goes silent. I wonder if that is like a time disruption. You bring up the Oz factor, it like it slows time down or something like that. So he is still moving, but it's so slow that he can't get through it, like some kind of time warp field.
That's also something that Jenny Randall, she's written a book about time storms.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that doesn't just happen in the context of UFOs. She also writes about people having going through this type of like time warps that aren't necessarily connected like to UFO sightings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool book. I haven't read it in a long time. I don't think I ever read the whole thing. I think I just skipped around in it, but I
I
have to go
read
back
the
to that
whole
at some
thing.
point.
I read the whole thing after I borrowed a copy from Thomas from HidDenmark, and I also wrote a link the review of it on Goodreads, which is the only positive review. The other review for Jenny Randall's Time Storms on there is quite negative. At least last time I checked. I also wrote a review about her book about crop circles and the one about the Pennine UFO wave that like hit northern England in the 1970s, late 1970s, which was otherwise a dry spell for UFO encounters in the UK. So it's interesting that there was this massive UFO wave in over this mountain range in northern England.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading about that. I don't remember details too well, but
I did.
um,
I remembered like a lot of the details, which I spent a lot of time analyzing in my review, complete with people trying to skeptically explain those sightings as helicopters, but Randall's finding that completely ridiculous. And also, there was also one, I think it was at Manchester, where people they like saw this massive spaceship hovering over the city. A group of three people, but if there really had been this uh, gigantic spaceship hovering over Manchester, wouldn't way more people have reported it?
right. Yeah, you would think so. Yeah.
And another thing about Maliszewski, was the first sighting in 1951, is that these small saucers that are unmanned, that are discharged by the bigger spaceship, that sounds very similar to the drones that are commonplace today, both being commercially operated by private citizens, but also used by the military. And that's also something Adamski he would later describe in 52 that the Venusians they had these telemeter discs, these unmanned flying saucers they used for surveillance and reconnaissance.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And the thing about in the second encounter, Maliszewski reported with the Zutornian pilot giving him a glass of wine and a piece of bread, in addition to the similarity to like the communion you brought up. I instantly thought of Joe Simonson and his alien pancakes. He was this farmer who in Northwoods, Wisconsin, USA, back in 1961, encountered aliens who gifted him with three small pancakes in exchange
Yeah.
for giving him in exchange for him giving the aliens some water. And
Right.
that's one of my all-time favorite high strangeness close encounters of the third kind, because it's like so weird and silly that why would anyone make that up?
Yeah, the classic space pancakes. We always like those. Um, it also reminded me of Orfeo Angelucci. He was given a drink. Um, I don't know if it was his first encounter. I think his first encounter was more like a visual one where he just saw UFOs, but the first time he actually encountered the entities that he met, they gave him some kind of fizzy drink.
I did I couldn't remember that either. I didn't know that. I'm not as familiar with Orthon and Julucha as I am with most of the other big name contactees from that. You were like Adamski, Fantasil, Bethurum, and Maliszewski. There's also in European fairy tales. You also have frequently elves and fairies offering food and drink to humans, and often when humans drink this, then when they're in fairyland, then it often takes months or even years before they return to the human world. And all these parallels between UFO contact stories and all the folklore about elves and fairies, that's not something that ufologists they would even start to pay much attention until much later. I think it was first something that Jacques Vallée he noticed in a Passport to Magonia.
Right, right. Yeah, and that wasn't published for another couple decades, right? So was that the 70s when that came out?
I think it was in the 60s.
Or the 60s. Okay, a little bit older.
And
So
John Keel, he'd also pick up on these parallels in the 1960s.
yeah, yep. Um, yeah, there was a theosophist by the name of E.L. Gardner who wrote about fairies quite a bit and thought that the fact that people could see fairies was an indication that we were at the dawn of the age of Aquarius. And toward the end of his life was when flying saucers started being seen, and he made that connection as well. That saucers were just the next evolutionary leap for the unseen people coming through.
And again, that's a total like Vallée or Keel like
Right.
idea.
Yeah, but almost coming from the opposite end, where he was a very philosophical and metaphysical kind of theosophist, writing about the inner workings of reality, and bringing it to a more anomalistic materialist perspective. So, yeah.
And now it's time to talk about the second of the two Danish UFO contactees that I'm going to talk about today, Knud Weiking, and he's the only one who is particularly known outside of Denmark, specifically in Czechia and Slovakia. And you will find out about pretty why that's the case pretty soon. On the night after the 20th of February 1967 at 15 minutes past 1 a.m. in a Copenhagen suburb named Branjo, which is also where I live, a 46-year-old Danish taxi driver named Knud Weiking. He has just finished his shift at work, and when he arrives in his lounge in his home, he suddenly receives a telepathic message instructing him to extinguish his cigarette and listen carefully. This voice identifies itself as belonging to Orthon, the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and the ruler of the entire universe. Orthon would then talk in detail to Viking about how the real truth behind all religions was human contact with extraterrestrials, whom pre modern humans they mistook for gods, angels, and demons. Orthon would also tell Viking several facts about Viking's own life, which only Viking and his wife they could possibly have known at the time. Then at 5 a.m., Orthon had finished speaking at Knud Weiking. He immediately woke up his wife to tell about this unusual experience. Then every evening after his shift ended as a taxi driver, Knud Weiking would then go on to communicate telepathically with Orthon and ask the extraterrestrial a lot of questions about the state of affairs on Earth. And Viking, he recorded all these channeling sessions on tape and wrote down all of Orthon's commentaries. So he ended up with hours of tape recordings and 400 pages of transcripts in various notebooks and commentaries. And again, I'm instantly reminded both of Muhammad transliterating the Quran after his encounters with the Archangel Gabriel, as well as Aleister Crowley, the British occultist, also transliterating the Book of the Law, which he also channeled from this entity called Iwas, which I think also was his guardian angel.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. One thing
So,
a minor point that I think is interesting there is that the mention of the cigarette, because I think a lot of space contacts really seem to hate smoking and tobacco. I've come across this a number of times where contactees have been admonished to quit smoking.
and I think there was like there were also this British family who were like abducted by aliens, I think in the 80s, and the aliens admonished them like to stop eating meat.
Yeah, and stop drinking liquor too. I think that was the Avely abduction.
Yeah, the Avery
Yeah,
abduction. I remember reading about that one in one of Colin Wilson's nonfiction books about UFOs and aliens.
that's a fascinating case. I could do a whole episode just on that case.
Yeah, he also wrote the book Space Vampires, a novel, a work of fiction, which also gives vampire folklore the Eric von Däniken ancient astronaut treatment. It was likewise made into a movie in the mid 80s called Life Force.
Yep, outstanding movie. It's Tobe Hooper directed that one, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
Colin Wilson didn't like that film himself, unfortunately, but I really
That's
liked
what
it.
I've heard. Yeah, that's great. There's a nude vampire.
Played by Matilda May.
Yeah, yeah,
And Orthon, he spoke among other things to when Orthon he like spoke to Knud Weiking, he spoke among other things about life on other planets, the mechanics of faster than light travel, as well as the future of life on Earth. The core of Orthon's messages to Knud Weiking, however, they revolved around an imminent nuclear war that would start with nuclear bomb detonations in China before spreading to the rest of Asia and eventually the whole planet, with a fleet of spaceships being ready to evacuate as many of the surviving Earth humans as possible. Shortly after Viking's experiences began, he would start coming into contact with Børge Jensen, who by then was the editor of UFO News, the member magazine of Sufoy. And again, uh, uh, H.C. Peterson, he had left Sufoy at this point, but again, there were still like people who had a positive attitude towards old school contactees in the organization who hadn't like yet quit to join EGAP instead. And again, there was the stuff I mentioned about how EGAP they were pretty hostile towards contactees who weren't George Adamski.
right.
The person who introduced uh, Viking to Børge Jensen was a courier named Jørgen Ellensø, and from Jørgen Ellensø, he learned about a man called Richard Grave in the UK who had formed an organization called the Universal Link. Børge Jensen, he had also written several articles by then in UFO news about Richard Grave. And Richard Grave, he was this British real estate agent who, starting in 1961, started receiving telepathic messages from an entity calling itself the Master, who told Grave about an imminent nuclear war with a fleet of extraterrestrial spaceship in orbit ready to rescue the surviving humans.
Hmm.
And the thing about something I found out later through Benny Grandal, who does the all the technical stuff for HidDenmark's website and owns a lot of like documents from Knud Weiking's organization, that Weiking he was actually aware of all these messages before he started having these receptions of these telepathic messages from Orthon.
Huh, yeah.
And the thing
So
about
one
Børge
wonders
Jensen,
about that.
what do you say?
I said one wonders about that
Yeah,
if he was conversant with the Robert Graves stuff before, and then and then started channeling himself. Yeah,
yeah. And Børge Jensen, he had from 1965 to 1966 attracted a group of UFO enthusiasts who had come to live with him in a town on Zealand called Borup. And in that town where Jensen made his living as a school teacher, the local population nicknamed him Space Jensen or Rum Jensen in Danish because he was so interested in UFOs and extraterrestrial life. It then became clear to this Borup circle that Vikings, Orthon, and Gravis Master, they were the same beings since their messages were so similar to each other. And the Viking, he quickly became the Danish medium of the group. They then started publishing a series of pamphlets describing Orthon's messages with titles like The Voice from Heaven and The Spiritual School of Borup. Viking, he then formed an organization with Jensen to promote Orthon's ideas called Universal Link, after the organization that Richard Grave he had also started in the UK to promote the messages he got from the Master.
This is almost like competition for Adamski's Get Acquainted program too, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That they're like that. There was another British competition for Adamski's Get Acquainted program, and that was the Ethereal Society, started by George King. He was interestingly also a taxi driver, and he claimed to be in contact with a Venusian emissary called Ethereus.
Right, yeah. Huh.
There's actually, I think it was BBC who actually like interviewed George King about Ethereus, where for an interview, I think it can be found on YouTube, where George King he puts this
like a blindfold on,
sun tanning mask over his eyes, and then starts channeling Ethereus and starts talking about the civilization on Venus.
It's a wonderful video. People can look that up. George King, Ethereus Society, BBC. I think there's a few different cuts of it, and it's wonderful to see.
Yeah, and today the Ethereal Society, they downplay the association with UFOs and extraterrestrials and stuff like that, and they instead present themselves more as this new religious movement influenced by theosophy and Hinduism and Buddhism, more than this type of UFO movement.
Yeah, because George King would incorporate yoga and things like that into his practice before channeling, I think, right? He would talk about doing yoga and meditation and such. So I think that became a precept with the Ethereus Society.
Yeah, and there's again this again that there's some UFO contactees that are more explicitly Christian and have a Christian message, but there are also ones that draw on theosophy, which again is like this kind, which again this is draws on both ancient Greek and Neoplatonism, as well as Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism as well.
Right. Yeah, theosophy is a little bit perhaps more ecumenical than people give it credit for. People often just describe it as stealing misunderstood things from Hinduism and Buddhism, but really it's just an attempt to make all these different religious traditions work together.
And that's also like the main thrust of most of the essays I've actually written by most of the essays written by Adamski that I have read, and when he's not talking about the details of the Venusian civilization, it reads very much like something that Blavatsky or Krishnamurti could have written.
Right. Yeah, and Adamski's first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, is mostly written by Desmond Leslie, who was very much a theosophist. He was part of the England Lodge of theosophy. So it's all over it, really. He's referencing the stanzas of John and the Secret Doctrine the entire time he's talking about flying saucers. And in that book, it's really just, I don't know, the last 30 pages maybe is written by Adamski. So.
And again, that courier, John Ellesøe, whom Knud Weiking met up with and learned about Jensen through, he was best known in Borup for claiming to be the reincarnation of Julius Caesar. And he joined Universal Link as well and became his third public face after Viking and Jensen. Ellesø, he also became famous for this strange sense of humor, and he also put an emphasis on reinterpreting of the Bible as really being descriptions of contact with extraterrestrials, but ancient humans mistook for angels because they didn't really have the frame of reference to understand any of that.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you were saying earlier about von Daniken's legacy.
Yeah, and also in the Aarslev Enge sighting, where from the 1600 again, the peasants there described what they saw as a wagon with no horses, with passengers who were strangely dressed and were taller than any human. But today it like sounds like an account of a spaceship and its crew.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, here where I'm from in Massachusetts, we have a handful of what have been described now as UFO sightings from the 1600s, but they're often kind of thought of as being like witch lights having something to do with witches, or like ghosts out on the sea, like ghost ships and things like that. So,
and there are similar stories from Longdendale in Derbyshire in the UK, where there's these flying lights in the sky that are usually attributed to flying witches. But I'm certain that if they first started appearing after 1947, they'd just be identified as UFOs instead.
right, yeah, it's all a matter of perspective and cultural frame of reference. So,
And back to Knud Weiking, he would, in the spring and summer of 1967, deliver talks about his channeled messages from Orthon to packed auditoriums. Uh, he attracted the biggest followings not just in Borup but in another town in Zealand called Diana Lund, as in Diana's Grove, where he would play these tape recordings of Orthon speaking through him and provide detailed instructions for exactly what to do when the nuclear battle for Armageddon began. And in the summer of 1967, one of the people in the audience was a Danish author called Claus Aarslev, who would later in the 90s go on to write several popular books about Fortean topics around here, and also about like indigenous cultures in the southwestern United States as well, which whom he had lived among in the 80s. And the one message that Orthon had given to Viking, which stood out most to to Aarslev, that this one. This is the one that Aarslev paid most attention to. This is Orthon with an important greeting to everyone willing to listen and understand. It is my will that 300 kroner will be donated to our movement's budget so that Knud and Branjo can pay for a ferry ticket to Jutland, where others thirst after the important message.
right. So it's not like they were asking for money. It's Orthon saying that the government should give them money to take the ferry over there to speak to
Yes,
people. Yeah. Yeah.
and in the autumn of 1967, Orthon he announced through Viking that the nuclear war would begin on Christmas Eve 1967, just as the master he had told Richard Grave 6 years earlier. In order to secure humanity's existence, it would be necessary to build a lead-lined bunker where 70 pregnant women, along with their doctors and midwives, could stay in security while the atomic Ragnarok erupted around them and the spaceships stayed ready in orbit around the Earth to evacuate the last survivors of humanity. Orthon even specified the exact dimensions of the bunker. Viking, he ended, and Universal Link, they ended up raising 200,000 Danish kroner to buy lumber and concrete and lead plates to construct the bunker near Borup. These lead plates, they were meant to insulate the bunker from atomic radiation. The bunker then stood ready by the 22nd of December, protected by 25 tons of lead plating, and its constructions had been finished a couple days ahead of the looming nuclear apocalypse, which Orthon had warned them about. And even the New York Times, they printed a story about the Danish UFO group and their doomsday bunker. And they
Yeah.
managed to construct it in only a few weeks, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and they took photos. I think the New York Times did, right? Are those the photos in your post on this, your article on this,
Yeah,
of the bunker itself, and they're really
yeah.
striking images.
They also had this a sign with high voltage danger, and over that sign there was all this drawing of an Adamski style saucer.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so what happened? The world didn't end, right?
No, on the 23rd of December, Orthon, he suddenly sent a new message to Viking. He commanded the group to leave the area and lock the door to the bunker and told them that they, with their construction project, they had shown their will to carry out Orthon's orders, so they knew they were ready to follow him. So the whole thing had just been a secret test of character. Then on the 24th of December, early in the morning, a local musician named Ove Jensen, he called Viking on the phone to talk about his plans for a perpetual motion machine. It dawned on Viking that the perpetual motion machine was the same so-called nuclear energy exchange process that Orthon had been talking about and the propulsion system of the flying saucers. Viking, he had only misunderstood this energy exchange process as a warning about nuclear war instead of the invention of a perpetual motion machine. As soon as Viking he realized that, Orthon commanded his followers to build such a perpetual motion machine and a flying saucer uh, to power with this machine so they could fly up and meet him and his alliance in space. Viking called for a new press conference where he and Ove Jensen they could show their plans for the perpetual motion machine to the public and talk about the new mission of Universal Link. There was just one big catch to all this is that back then newspapers they would not see publication until the 26th of December, so there'd be no newspaper on either the 24th or the 25th. This meant that 1,000 disappointed people around there, they had shown up waiting outside the Borup fallout shelter on the 24th, and they stayed there all the way until midnight.
Wow.
And then when the newspapers came out on the 26th of December 1967, they were full of colorful stories about the group's new project and the sharp criticism of the doomsday prophecies that Viking had received from Orthon and spent so much time and energy on promulgating. Most of Universal Link's members they left afterwards, but his closest inner circle around Knud Weiking they stayed with him. And Viking he continued to receive channeled messages from Orthon, and he made quite the fortune from dismantling the bunker and selling the materials because the price of lead was very high back in December 1967.
Wait, so didn't anybody come after him for the money that they donated for his cause?
Not to my knowledge.
Wow. Okay. You think he would have ended up in court, or people would have been violent towards him to get their money back?
But that's the thing. The 1960s and 1970s were significantly more innocent and naive time than today. Again, both for the better and for the worse.
Right. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. Um, it also strikes me that the whole bunker fallout shelter aspect is sort of like a big orgone um, chamber,
An
with the lead
orgone
and the
accumulator, and it
yeah,
makes me feel greater, as that Hawkwind song goes.
right, yeah, yeah, with the lead and the wood and everything, the various layers. It, maybe it would be,
Yeah,
yeah,
and orgone therapy was also something that William Burroughs, who was like an influential name in alternative circles back then, he was really into, and he had also built his own private orgone chamber.
yeah, right, yeah. Um, well, that's great. So, where did they go from there?
Okay, uh, here's some, and here's something. This is why Viking actually is somewhat known outside Denmark already, because in the 1990s there was a Czech UFO contactee named Ivo Benda who started translating the writings of various Western UFO contactees into the Czech language, and Knud Weiking was among them, along with George Adamski and George Van Tassel and Billy Meyer and others. And after Ivo Benda, he started a movement called the Universe People, who became quite popular in alternative circles in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia during the late 90s and early 2000s. Viking, he ended up having quite a following in those two countries, completely unbeknown to himself. And I just find it very fascinating that Czechia and Slovakia, they would suddenly see this resurgence of 1950s, 60s style UFO contactee culture. That's it feels like a bit random to me, but I have the impression that if I were Czech or Slovak, I would perhaps would understand the context around this a bit better.
Yeah, it seems like they were kind of behind the curve in that respect. Yeah.
But the thing about the Raelians, they're also like very much a product of this old school UFO contactee culture. And they only really got going in the mid 70s, but they're like still pretty prominent in the French-speaking countries. In addition to France, they also have a foothold in Quebec, the francophone part of Canada. So
Yeah, that's true. It is kind of funny because you think the contactees almost went out of style by the end of the 1960s, but there's always been some around, um, particularly when it comes to the Ashtar channelings and all that. Like that never really went away. Over here in the States, you had Tuella that was promoting that through the 80s into the 90s. So, and I understand that's part of this whole story too, as
yeah,
far as the Czech contactee groups go.
yeah. In 2006, there was this 24-year-old woman named Lotte Nielsen who lived in a hippie commune located in a former manor called Overdrevsgård near Borup. And one day when she came home, uh, she saw a stranger sitting in the rocking chair in that commune's living room. And that stranger was a Slovak construction worker named Branjo who had an interest in UFO contactee culture, and he moved to Denmark from Germany specifically because he wanted to meet Knud Weiking, whom Branjo understood was the most popular UFO prophet in Denmark. And Branjo, he also knew that Viking and Universal Link's last known address was here in Borup, and they used the exact same post office box as the hippie commune Lotte Nielsen lived in also used. And as soon as Branjo he had moved into the commune, Lotte Nielsen, she had two UFO experiences of her own. And one evening, she put her 2-year-old daughter to bed and saw a row of glowing green and blue lights appear over the daughter's blanket. When she told Branjo about the incident, he then replied that he had asked the extraterrestrials to send positive energy to help the girl fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is fascinating to me because there's always weird anomalous light phenomena that happens. And it's less of a focus for a lot of people, but Barbara Fisher, for instance, is I guess writing a whole book on light forms and light beings, but you do hear about this sometimes with UFO outside of the actual contact with humanoids or occupants. You get these weird like light effects that happen indoors and outdoors. But I thought that was fascinating because then that happened again, right, with the daughter's teddy bear.
Yeah, that in 2006, Lotte Nielsen, she would later in that year see 20 spheres of golden light emanate from her daughter's teddy bear. And this occurrence kept repeating for several months, even after Branjo he had left the commune. Then, uh, then suddenly Nielsen found that these UFO-like spheres of light, they no longer emanated from the teddy bear, even when she shook it. And
Huh.
her and Branjo, she had also attempted to find the current whereabouts of Knud Weiking, but they couldn't find any trace of him anywhere in Denmark. And Branjo's saga continues. Branjo, he would later claim to be the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, just as Orthon did, and in telepathic contact with another extraterrestrial, namely Commander Ashtar, whom an American aircraft mechanic named George Van Tassel he claimed to have met back in 1950s, and Ivo Benda he had also translated Van Tassel's writings into Czech in the 90s. And if you look up the press material by the Universe people and their website, then they very prominently feature George Van Tassel's Commander Ashtar.
Yeah, right. I mean, Ashtar is an entire rabbit hole that, and that really piqued my interest because reading your article about this. I mean, this is getting toward the end of the article when Ashtar appears, but I'm like, oh shit! Like, I don't even really know too much about European Ashtar contacts, so it's very interesting.
And I can tell that Ashtar ended up having a very different life after George Van Tassel, and the Ashtar mythology that's in large part been continued and read and developed further by Ivo Benda ends up very different than how George Van Tassel presented it.
Yeah, because I mean, Van Tassel was the first to claim contact in 1952. Um, with Ashtar, which later became known as Ashtar Command or Ashtar Galactic Command, depending on who you're talking to. But very shortly thereafter, Robert Short started contacting Ashtar, and Van Tassel just kind of washed his hands of that, that contact and let Robert Short have it, basically. So it's kind of funny. The contacts between Van Tassel and Ashtar were fairly short lived. He continued contacting other space beings, but the Ashtar thing he just kind of let go of.
And the thing about Branjo, he back in 2006, he after he established telepathic contact with Ashtar, he claimed that Ashtar would soon make his existence public to the Earth people. Branjo, he also became known as a faith healer in Nørrebro district in Copenhagen, where he draw his following from the homeless population there. And many of these homeless followers, they then ended up living in the house owned by Gitte Juhl and Jacob Wedelsby, a Danish author who would later write a book called The Law of Humans about this contactee subculture. And Branjo, he would then enlist Gitte Juhl's talent as a psychic medium to establish telepathic contact with Ashtar and communicate with him on a daily basis, with Ashtar speaking through Gitte. And Branjo, he could not convince Ashtar to appear in person in Nørrebro, which was what Branjo he had promised his fellow UFO enthusiasts back home in Slovakia. Likewise, Branjo he also promised that a spaceship would appear hovering over Copenhagen, and that did obviously not come true either. So Branjo he ultimately returned back home to Slovakia.
Huh. Yeah, this is kind of like a weird full circle of contactees, where you have Viking with his contacts and building such a name for himself, eventually getting translated and sent to Czechia and Slovakia, and then the Branjo being influenced by that, coming looking for him in Denmark and living there for a long time. It's like this closed loop of contacteeism that's kind of cool, and I guess he eventually left.
Yeah.
Do we know what became of Knud Weiking?
Yes, that in 2007, a Czech man he would appear in Borup to search for the Orthon people once again, only to come in contact with Viking's grandchild, who told him that Viking died the year before. The Czech he then proclaimed that he wanted to take over the Universal Link movement and moved home to Czechia again. However, afterwards, we haven't found out if anything ever came of this. Then in 2014, three Czechs visited Borup to wait for the second coming of Christ, which they had been told would take place in Borup, and they had found out through telepathic communication with Orthon. And one of these Czechs was a software programmer named Miroslav Svoboda, He told Politiken, which means politics in Danish, and is another popular Danish newspaper, that he was genuinely surprised that how few Danes they knew about either Orthon or George Adamski or Knud Weiking. And Svoboda, he also showed the editors of the newspaper a notebook from the 60s where a channeled message from Orthon predicted correctly that Denmark would win the 1992 European Football Championship.
Because Space Brothers are very concerned about the football
European
matches.
Football Championship, apparently.
Well, everybody on Earth loves football except Americans, so I think apparently we're the only ones in the universe that don't follow it.
And the Knud Weiking, he would, and his movement, they would later appear in two popular Danish novels published in 2006. One of them is A Blue Brother by Ib Michael, which revolves around the entire contactee subculture of the 60s. The other is The Law of Humans, which Jacob Wilsby wrote as a fictionalized account of his encounters with Branjo and the universe people.
All right.
And something I should make clear here is that in this connection, that despite having the same name and similar general appearance and a somewhat similar message, Knud Weiking's Orthon was not the same entity as George Adamski's Orthon. At the very least, Knud Weiking's Orthon did never mention anything about Adamski.
Yeah, and Adamski's Orthon didn't claim to be the reincarnation of Christ either.
No, this Christian trust to universal link, that is not quite the same message as Adamski's philosophy, which again is closer to like theosophy and Advaita Vedanta Hinduism than to anything from the Abrahamic religious tree.
Yeah, but the reincarnation concept is so strange because it would seem, from a Christian viewpoint, to be pretty heretical for anybody to claim to be the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, right?
And again, that's more. That's all. Again, that's almost closer like to like how in Tibetan Buddhism there's this concept of like a tulku, which I think is a bodhisattva who reincarnates by choice and deliberately chooses which humans they reincarnate as.
Right. Yeah, I could see that for sure.
And that's something that also,
but then how is there? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That was also, and that's also something which was an influence on theosophy again.
Right. Yeah, it always comes back to theosophy, for better or worse. But so that it seems like there's a further distinct Orthon with the predictions about the second coming of Christ then, because if Christ is coming back, isn't Christ and Orthon the same person in that stream? If Orthon's predicting the second coming?
Yeah, this is something this is something that it doesn't make complete sense to me either.
Right. Yeah, there just seems to be some narrative inconsistencies here. Yeah, that's something a Star Trek fan would never put up with in the storyline.
Nope, but the thing about, and that reminds me that the late 60s, that seems to have been when the entire narrative of ancient astronauts being mistaken for gods, demons, and angels that really hit the mainstream consciousness. It had already been a popular theme in science fiction literature for several decades by then. For example, it's a central theme in the H.P. Lovecraft's novel At the Mountains of Madness, which was published in 1936.
Yeah.
But in 1967, that was when there was a Star Trek episode titled "Who Mourns for Adonai" or "Who Mourns for Adonais." I can't remember the exactly, but that one had the crew of the USS Enterprise meet the Greek gods, who just turned out to be aliens, whom the ancient Greeks mistook for gods, and that was also when Arthur C. Clarke's 1968 novel came out, 2001, A Space Odyssey, and which got made into a movie by Stanley Kubrick, which also had the whole ancient astronaut theme, and that was in '68 also when Erich von Däniken's allegedly non-fiction book Chariots of the Gods came out, and von Däniken he actually just died, and it feels really weird that he's gone. But in many ways, he comes across as a product of like a much more naive and idealistic era when ufology wasn't like as cynical and paranoid as this would become in the '80s.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. They cast a long shadow all the way up to modern day with, I guess, Ancient Aliens is coming back with a new season, so that's still going. the the whole Von Daniken idea survives, but
And in even the Belgian comic book hero Tintin, he met aliens whom ancient people had mistaken for gods in a storyline titled Flight 714, where um, but where the action takes place. The action takes place in an island in Indonesia, which has these ancient temple with statues of gods that like clearly look like astronauts and cosmonauts in spacesuits. And then they meet this Adamski style telepathic contactee who tells him about how the gods this temple was built to honor were astronauts, and their fire chariots were like starships.
uh,
And then when the volcano on that island erupts, this flying saucer comes to rescue not just Tintin and Captain Haddock, but also the villain Rastapopoulos and his henchmen. And the only people who don't get their memories, the only characters who don't get their memories wiped are the contactee, who's called Mig Estanitov, as Tintin's dog, Terry.
yeah.
And this storyline was first serialized in magazines from 1966 to 1967 before being published in a collected album in 1968. So the whole ancient
Wow.
aliens thing, it even reached Tintin, this Belgian comic book that has been running since the 1930s.
Oh, that's really funny. And he goes, and it's in Indonesia too, so it's comes back to uh Maliszewski's description of the humanoids he encountered from those flying saucers.
Yeah, he described that they look perfectly human and could like blend in Indonesia.
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it keeps looping back on itself. This whole story.
And I didn't notice those parallels. I didn't notice, and there were like a lot of like religious parallels with this that I hadn't noticed either. And again, I should also mention that I wouldn't be able to again have written this article about the Knud Weiking Orthon group if Benny Grandal he wouldn't been fact checked and consulted. And uh, I'd also like to thank Marcin Chlebowski for correspondence about UFO culture in Czechia and Slovakia.
Yeah. Oh well, that's this is always kind of a group effort, and then that's, I think, that one of the really fun things about researching and writing about these subjects is contacting other people from other parts of the world and working together and finding new insights with these things. But as far as the stuff that I mentioned, that now you have fodder for another article, and you can compare the religious philosophies and the communion aspect of it and everything with the actions of the uh, flying saucer occupants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and again and again again that's another dimension of it. which for a long time it was like only really Valet and Keel who would observe that. Also, Kenneth Grant, British occultist, and he was
Yep.
like a student of Aleister Crowley, who broke with the master to form his own occult order because there were like a lot of key aspects they disagreed with each other about. But he also took seriously UFO contact as something religious and occult before almost anyone else did.
Yeah. Yeah, and he brings in that Lovecraftian stuff as well. So Grant does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um all right. Well, I mean, we've been going for a little while now. This is
Yeah,
all very
I like
enlightening
expected
and
it like to
wonderful
take
stuff.
I expected it to take like just over an hour, but we've been like talking for just over 2 hours.
Yeah. um yeah, but I mean, I've been enjoying it, and I think my listeners will love it because
Yeah,
it's always fun to hear about contactees, and you can only hear about the same dozen or so from the US so many times.
yeah, and this is why I'm like really proud of this. I'm not just talking about Danish contactees, but also a Czech contactee who Ivo Benda and Branjo from from Slovakia. So
Yeah, yeah, it's all new names to me that are fascinating and every bit as entertaining to hear about as contactees from elsewhere in the world. So uh, I will include the links below, but where can people find the articles you wrote so they can read it closely and see the pictures that you include with it as well? Uh,
they can find it at hiddenmark.dk, as in HidDenmark.dk.
yeah, yep. So, and there's a whole archive of other fascinating things on that website. Um, and it's translated in several languages, I think, right? So,
It's
because I know
available in
there's a
Danish and English.
just Danish and English. Okay, yep. So there is a tab if it comes up in Danish for my listeners. There's a tab where you can look at the English version. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but no, it's a wonderful website. I've enjoyed periodically checking it out over the years because at this point, I think you and I have been in contact, or at least circling each other in social media for a good couple of years, and it's nice to finally actually have a conversation with you.
Yeah, this is like again, this is like the most fun I've had since I watched that Frank Henenlotter movie marathon at that local art house cinema.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment for me. I think I'm very touched that I'm as fun as Basket Case.
And as fun as Frankenhooker.
Break hooker, yeah, of course. Well, is there anything else that people should check out or find online for you? Is there social media that you'd like to direct people to, or anything like that?
Um, not at the moment, not right now.
Okay, all right, yeah, but Hid Denmark, people, that's just Denmark with an HID in front of it. .dk, and check that out. Check out Simon's writing and the writing of his uh, cohorts there on that site, and it's all a lot of very fun stuff. And thank you so much for joining me today. This is a lot of fun, and I think people will very much enjoy it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, take care.
Take care.